You guys seen that on YouTube videos? That's what that's for. I'll just hang out for a little bit. But essentially what I'm going to be talking about is some of my work and some of the stuff that I did at Pixar. But this is like a decade ago, so I've done other things, which is why I say and beyond. How many of you have seen Pixar movies? Any? Okay. How many of you saw the original Incredibles? That might have been before. Oh, wow, okay. Yeah, the first one, maybe? Yeah, because that might have been before you were born. Oh my God, I'm feeling old, but that's cool. It's fine, it's fine. That was the first movie that I worked on at Pixar, so I'll be talking a little bit about that. And since then, I've done a few other things, which I'll be talking about as well. But mostly, it's kind of about this. And how many of you have an interest in going into entertainment in some form as a career? Kind of. You're thinking about it. Yeah, okay. And then how many of you have like no idea what you're gonna do? Okay, that's good. Yeah. This talk is for you. And then how many of you have, of the ones that are thinking about going into entertainment, have a specific company or career that you already are thinking about? Kinda?
Yeah.
Okay, what are you thinking about?
Storyboarding.
Oh, storyboarding. Yeah. Okay, yeah. That's good. Have you seen this book before? Do you have this book?
I think we have one in the studio.
Oh, it's already in the studio?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Or like one version of it.
Okay. Well, I mean, you can like leaf through it and stuff like that. One of the reasons this book was made, there are a lot of people that work at Pixar that just do drawings and don't do like computer. Although some of these things are drawn on the computer, but mostly they have a traditional arts background. But you never see any of their work literally in the movie because it's all done in computers. But that is the basis for all of the movies at Pixar. Somebody creates art and then it inspires other people. But nobody gets to see that normally unless you happen to take a tour of Pixar or something. So they thought, oh, let's make a book. And so they made this book that kind of shows some of the behind the scenes stuff that goes on, like the concept art and then what are known as color scripting. And all of these things are not used directly in there, but if you've seen any of these earlier movies, this is like from a decade ago or so, then you'll recognize it, some of these stuff. Yeah, that one in particular, that's from The Incredibles, which is the one that I worked on and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about. But what's impressive about it is they're very simple drawings, and yet you kind of, if you've seen the movie, you recognize which parts of the movie those things came from. Oh, I noticed you're wearing a design shirt.
Yeah.
What does it say on there?
I literally can't read.
Oh, design matters to me. Okay, that's funny because I happen to work in, now I'm at Apple in the design studio. And so they talk about the importance of design. And one of the big things they say is everything that you see was designed at some point by a human being. And you never really think about the people that do it. But like, okay, you look at this contraption here that hold the camera, or you look at like this display or these cables, somebody made an intentional choice to design them to be that way. Hopefully in a usable way, hopefully in an aesthetic way, but it kind of points to alternative like career paths. It doesn't have to just be drawing. You can also focus on like how things work, how things are designed. So design is a big part of art.
It's actually a big push in the medical field to better design information for people. So like,
yeah.
You can access, like patient care, right? Because a lot, like you go to the doctor, they give you like this wall of text, and you're like, what is all this, dude?
Yeah.
And we have one of our students, Delia, who's in, she's at Tufts now. She was at Disney. She moved over to Tufts in Boston, and that's her focus area now is like medical information design. So she's trying to like work with hospitals and make like, hey, you have this condition. This is how you take care of it, and this is how you get better. Right?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Mak Kobayashi, and I'm going to be talking about some of the work that I did at Pixar and beyond. Mostly I'm going to try to tell you what it was like to work in the entertainment industry, although I don't work in the entertainment industry now, so I'll give you a little bit of background on who I am. I never went to art school, but I've always been interested in drawing and arts and things like that. I've pretty much drawn my whole life and just enjoyed doing it as a side hobby. And so I've never been a professional artist, but it has informed a lot of what I do and the kinds of career that I've taken since then. And so hopefully this will still be useful to you, even if you are more on the art side of things. When I was a kid, I just loved drawing, but I also really loved computers. And so I thought, okay, what I would love to do is somehow use computers and create art. And I'm kind of old, so right around that time, was when the first Toy Story movie came out. I don't know if anybody seen the original Toy Story movie? Oh, okay, yeah, amazing, yeah. So that came out like when I was in college, and I thought that is exactly what I want to do because I love computers, I love art, and so right afterwards I applied to all the computer graphics companies. So Pixar is the one that made Toy Story. ILM are the people that did the special effects and visual effects for the Star Wars movies and Jurassic Park and things like that. DreamWorks did a bunch of movies like Shrek and so forth. And I got rejected from every single one of them. I know, so sad, so sad. But this is a life lesson, right? You don't give up on your dream. And so instead, right out of grad school, I had a degree in computer science and a specialization in computer graphics, and I ended up working at a games company that some of the people there were kind of related to. And so I worked at this tiny games company called Radical Entertainment. Nothing I worked on ever shipped. I was only there for 1 year. So if you have an interest in working in the games industry, I don't have a whole lot of experience in it. However, there was an amazing 20-hour documentary, like 30 episodes, covering this game called Psychonauts 2, the sequel to the original Psychonauts. I don't know if you've heard of that. But they go way in depth about what it was like. They show you everything about what it was like to make that game, and there's like all these ups and downs. And even though I only worked in the games industry for 1 year, a lot of it felt very, very familiar. So, you know, if you're interested in the games industry, check that out. Although it can be a little traumatizing because they go through a lot. It's hard. But after a year for working in there, I happened to go to a computer graphics conference, and I was sitting next to a friend of mine who was just about to interview for this company doing this computer graphics movie. And I was like, can I get an interview as well? And they're like, sure, kid. And so I interviewed, and then my friend actually turned down the offer, but I did not. And so I worked for 4 years at this company called Square USA. Have anybody heard of like the Final Fantasy video games?
I've heard of them.
Okay, so this was not the video game, but the person who was like the head of the video game, he decided he wanted to make a movie. And so he made a company that was sort of like half of the video game people, half Japanese company, and then half like Western company. Made it in Hawaii. So I lived in Hawaii for 4 years working on this movie called Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. However, the movie totally bombed at the box office, and the studio shut down right after that. But I got to work on some amazing stuff. I got a lot of experience doing things like, this is just like a force field effect that I did in there. And there's a few other stuff. This is a volumetric shader that I wrote for making explosions and things like that. And you can kind of see how it goes from the wireframe to a shaded version to a composite. So as a result, I got a lot of experience doing effects. And so then I applied to Pixar again, and this time I actually did get in. So that was great. Yay, happy. Yeah. And I worked on all of these movies, everything from Incredibles to Monsters University, although I did not work on Cars 2. I was in the effects department for the whole time. So if you've seen any of those movies, there's a chance that you might have seen one of the things that I worked on. And just as a side note, I was there for those movies. Of the movies that I worked on, 75% of them won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature Film. Of the ones that I did not work on, only 28% won Academy Award. I'm just saying. Yeah. But it was a great experience. I worked on a lot of things, but in particular for The Incredibles, I worked on Violet's force field and her effect, her invisibility effect. I did the Frozone ice bridge, and let's see, what else did I do? And then just a bunch of miscellaneous effects since then. So if you've seen Ratatouille, and there's this scene where Remy is making like this really stinky soup, and then he makes it look beautiful, I did the soup. And then in WALL-E, I did like the like sort of scanning rig kind of thing. And if you've seen Monsters University, there's like a gag where Mike punches the thing and all these feathers come down, or fur comes down. That was me. Yeah, little thing. And it was a wonderful experience. But then, like, I was kind of in between movie project, and they said, oh yeah, take some time off. So I took off a month. And then I got a random email from a recruiter, and they're like, hey, how would you like to interview at Google? And I was like, I don't work at Google. I'm not a software engineer. But I thought I would give it a shot. And then one thing led to another, and I actually ended up getting an offer. And I was like, well, I don't think I can turn this down. It's like an offer from Google. So then I worked there, and mostly what I worked on was this thing called Tilt Brush. Has anybody heard of that by any chance? Okay, so Tilt Brush is a drawing app in VR. Anybody here tried virtual reality or anything like that?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah. It's basically that you put on this headset and you see things in 3D, and so the thing that I worked on was a drawing program in there. So, you know, if you have a chance, you should try that. Maybe you should set up a VR corner or something. I don't know, Quest or something. And that was a lot of fun. But then Google kind of shifted away from doing that sort of thing, and then I got an offer to work at Apple. And I can't talk about what I'm working on. That's okay. It's not really art related, but mostly I'm going to talk about Pixar and explain a little bit about what the animation production pipeline is and what kinds of things go on in making a movie. So you start off obviously with a script or an idea for what the movie is going to be, and somebody's actually just writing things down, like people's dialogues, the actions, and so forth, in pages and pages and pages. And typically it's like roughly 1 page per minute for a movie. And so if you've got a 90-minute movie, that's about 90 pages of script, dialogue and action and so forth. And then somebody takes that script and then they create pre-production art. So that's the stuff that's in that book, for example. And that kind of inspires the rest of the team and kind of gives a shape to what the movie is going to look like and what sort of things are taking place in there. And then there's a team that creates layout. And so this is all done, the layout part is more in CG. So they create very, very simple versions of all the characters, all the sets. Sometimes they're just cubes stretched out to represent things like cities and so forth. And then there's a sets department that focuses on creating the sets. So a set is anything that is like a location or props and so forth. And then there's also a similar team that designs all these characters. So every single character that you've seen in a Pixar animated movie was created like by this group. And that entails both the modeling and the rigging and the shading and all that sort of stuff. And then finally, there's an animation department that takes those character rigs and then animates them. And you can think of the animation department as being the actors of the movies for animated feature films. And then it goes to the shots departments. So everything up until now is called an asset department because they're working on some sort of thing that gets used throughout the movie. And then everything afterwards is called a shot department because we work on a specific shot. So Remy's dancing in this shot, or Elastigirl is stretching in this shot, or whatever. And within the shots department, there's things like simulation, so they deal with the clothes, the water, and things like, well, although mostly just clothes and things like that. And then the effects department, which is what I was in, kind of does all the stuff that doesn't fit into the other departments. So things like force field superpowers or explosions, water simulations, fire, that sort of thing. And then there's also a crowds department, so you have like tons of people in the background. Somebody's actually working to make those crowds of people look realistic. And then there's global tech, and they just sort of deal with all the technology that needs to happen in between all the different departments. Different movies have different requirements. So have you seen the trailer for Elemental, the upcoming movie? So in that particular movie, all the characters are special effects. And so there's probably, I don't work there anymore, but I'm guessing that there were a lot of people in global tech that was helping to make all that seem, feasible and realistic. And then finally, there's lighting. And this is something that a lot of people who've never worked in the industry don't really think about. But if you don't have lights, you don't see anything. So all the other things would just be black. And lighting is a group that adds lights so that you can actually see something, but also they're there to make it look artistic. So are you familiar, any of you familiar with like the artist Caravaggio, for example? It's like a classical painter. Oh yeah, somebody's got great taste. And what he did was he painted scenes, but he would introduce them in a very dramatic lighting. And so he'd have very dark backgrounds with just like, say, a single light shining on the main character, and then you would see them glowing by candlelight or something like that. And so things like that would be the lighting department. And then finally rendering, where we take all the information, all the data and all the stuff, and we toss it to a farm and just hit a button, and hopefully it comes out as a beautiful picture. But when it doesn't come out as a beautiful picture, if there's like a problem or issues or technical limitations, then the rendering team helps kind of figure out what was going on in there. And then we're out the door, and that is how a Pixar movie is made. Also, pretty much any CG movie. Although this is the ideal for what the pipeline should be, but it tends to go a little bit more like this because you often don't realize that something doesn't quite work until you see it at a much later stage. The later you realize that mistake, the more expensive it is, and you can kind of gauge how important story is to a studio by how late they're willing to make very drastic changes. And so one of the common things that people say at Pixar is like, story is king. And everybody says story is important, but it's to the point at Pixar where they will sometimes take things that are all the way animated, lit, rendered, and almost out the door, but they're like, this scene doesn't work, we're gonna just cut it. Or we're gonna like redo the whole thing, and then, you know, it's very, very painful, very expensive, many tears are shed, many weekends are spent redoing all that work. But it's because at Pixar, story is incredibly important. And for working in entertainment, there are a lot of pros, and I'm gonna list some of them here. One is, you get like a really cool workplace, and this is just a shot I found on the internet, but this is actually from the Pixar atrium. And the way the building is laid out, it's just this one giant building. You can kind of think of it sort of shaped like this, but much larger. And in the center, there's just this large open area, and in that center area, there are all the amenities. So the bathrooms are there, the cafe is there, the mail room, and so as a result, throughout the day, everybody kind of crosses through the atrium. And this was by design, so that during the day, you have a good chance of running into people that you don't normally sit next to. And so every studio is a little bit different, but the way Pixar is laid out, there's a west wing and there's an east wing. And on the west wing, it tends to be people that are more on like the technical side of things. So I was in effects. There was also the lighting department, and then there's some like the rendering team and so forth. That's all on the west side. And then on the east side tends to be more like the artistic, earlier pre-production side, so animation and the art department. And so normally you wouldn't see each other kind of because you're kind of busy working, but because you have this open area in the middle, you get to kind of run into other people, and hopefully that cross-pollinates some ideas. And this is actually a concept that goes at a lot of other places as well. And so if you have a good working environment, then you have some way for people to kind of connect to each other. And so this is one of the coolest things about working in entertainment. You get to work with both artists and technical people and production people, and all of that fuels this. It's a multidisciplinary experience, a multidisciplinary field. And so by that I mean, a lot of jobs, you just do your thing, and then you work with other people that do the same thing. What's one of the coolest things about being in entertainment is that you have a specific thing that you get good at and an expertise, but the people that you work with are experts in something else that you have no idea like how to do. And as a result, you work together and you create like something that neither of you could have done on your own. And it's one of my favorite things, being able to work with artists and technical people in production. And then finally, one of the best things about entertainment as opposed to, say, tech companies is that in entertainment, there is a single product that you are making. So in the case of Pixar and DreamWorks and so forth, you're making a single movie. Everybody on that team, it's like several hundred people or so, is working to make that one project. And it makes, I don't know if you've ever worked on a group project together, but it can, it's got ups and downs. It can be super stressful. It can be really exciting. But by the end, you feel like really bonded with those people. And in an entertainment company, and like movie companies in particular, what they do at the end of that production is they have what's called a wrap party, because the whole project has come to a wrap. Then they show the movie in a screening, and everybody who's worked on it gets to see it with like their loved ones and so forth, and it's just a great feeling. But best of all, then it's over. So you don't keep on working on that movie once it's released. Whereas in tech, sometimes you're working on a project and then you keep on working with the next version and the next version and then the next version, and it can be never ending. And you never get that sense of like, oh, I'm done, but whatever, it's fine. And then some of the cons about working in the entertainment industry is it is incredibly hierarchical. And by that I mean, there is one director at Pixar for every project, and then there's you at the very bottom. The director is the one who is controlling everything about the movie, and then some of it gets delegated and so forth. But when you're working on a particular thing, you're just working on a very small part of it, and there's somebody, kind of your lead or the people that are in charge of these things, and what they're looking for is not necessarily just your thing, but like how your thing fits into the rest of the movie. And so as a result, you may not have as much creative freedom to do whatever you want, because you have to basically serve the vision of the director. As opposed to being in like tech, oftentimes they don't know what they want, because part of the thing is to try to explore things that nobody's ever done before. And so they'll have a lot of leeway. People will have a lot more leeway to say like, oh, I have an idea. And then they're like, okay, great, go and run with that, see if you can come up with something. And another issue is crunch time. So if you watch that documentary that I kind of mentioned earlier, it talks about how there are deadlines, and as that deadline approaches, things get more and more stressful. I've heard some of you are working on an AP art thing, so you might be aware of that. Now, some of you might be working late tonight or tomorrow night on these projects. Imagine that, like years and years along the line of working on a game project. And this is actually one of the differences between games and movies. If you're working on a game and the project just isn't ready, then you might have to delay the release date for that movie. But then that can become really, really expensive, because if you tell everybody, oh, buy our game in 2023 for Christmas, and then they're like, no, we can't make it, and then, you know, bad things happen. But sometimes games do get delayed. Movies, on the other hand, can't get delayed, because once you've announced, especially if you're at the scale of Pixar, and if Pixar says, come watch Elemental on, I don't know, what is like June 10th or something or whatever, and in 2023, that date does not change. And so what happens is you just have crunch time and you just work really, really late. And then there's also like things kind of start slipping a little bit. Things that the director used to care about early on in production. It's like, oh, the color of the t-shirt's not right. Like towards the end of the production, it's like, as long as he's wearing clothes, it's fine. And then ideally you kind of design, the project is going smoothly so that you get all the right things settled at the early part, and then by the end it doesn't. But you know, it can be incredibly stressful because, like I said, that date doesn't change, but the work just gets bigger and bigger sometimes. And the other thing is, there is kind of a bit of a low pay issue. I don't want to like just crush anybody's dreams or anything. But no, I mean, you can't. I think like Pixar in particular was a great company and probably one of the most stable companies especially in the Bay Area. But the Bay Area is like super expensive. And so I've heard of people that like worked there, started like a few years after I did, and like, you know, continue to work there, but they like will never be able to buy a house because their salaries go up, but the price of houses go up even faster. And the reason is that there's just a limited amount of demand for, you know, movies in general. There's only like so many people in the world, and they're only going to watch so many movies. And like if Pixar made 20 movies a year, it's not like they're going to get 20 times as much money, because after a point they're like, okay, I've seen one, that's fine. And also there are a lot of people who want to work at companies like Pixar, DreamWorks, ILM, or whatever, and so the competition is kind of tough. And as a result, because of all of that, it's a little bit harder to get larger salaries and so forth. But, you know, I don't want to end it on that note, because it is an incredible experience. I'm really happy that I got to do it, and I got a lot out of it. So please do continue, you know, dreaming and stuff like that. But yes.
I wanted to know how many designers worked with you on a movie like in The Incredibles. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I've got I've got a little thing at the end, so hopefully we'll have a lot of time for Q&A. But I will keep that in mind.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. How many of you are still kind of interested in working in entertainment? Hopefully I didn't. No, okay, all right, good. Yeah, so how to get a job in the demo reel. And I remember some of the questions that were submitted kind of refer to this. The number one thing that matters in any of this is the demo reel. And by that, I mean it's like you are creating a video or whatever of a sample of your work. And that is primarily your resume, your CV or whatever. This is how you get a job. And before you kind of go into that, you kind of have to think what it is that you want to do. And so the first question is, are you a generalist or are you a specialist? And so by that I mean, suppose we broke down art, all of art, into these 5 axes of like different art disciplines that you could have. And this doesn't include everything, but just an idea. And suppose you had somebody that was actually pretty good at just about everything, like a pretty good animator, very good animator, decent modeler, lighting, and so forth. And then suppose you have another person who's terrible at everything except really, really good at animation. Which of these 2 people do you think is going to get hired as an animator? Probably the specialist. Yeah, and this is true for every large studio, because what they're looking for is not somebody who can do like all the different jobs decently. They're looking for the very best person to do a very particular job. This is not quite true for smaller studios and also for smaller game studios in particular. So the smaller company that you're working for, the more likely it is that being a generalist is really useful. So that's just something to keep in mind. And the second thing is, in a demo reel, you want to start strong. And so this is actually the demo reel that I had after working on Final Fantasy. And this is what I used to try to get a job at Pixar the second time. I was much more successful. This is also from a YouTube video that I made with my kid from then this was 7 years ago or something like that, when he was much a little smaller. But I essentially talked in that video about what it was important in a demo reel. And essentially it's like, you gotta start strong, you gotta show your very best work, and you gotta keep it short. And the reason is that a lot of these larger companies are looking through hundreds and hundreds of demo reels at a time. And so they don't really have like an hour to look at all of your stuff. And as a result, what they'll do is they'll kind of sometimes look at the first 10 seconds and say like, okay, that's good enough, and then, or this is not as impressive as I need, and then they'll just skip all the other stuff. So you have to start with like the very best thing that you can, and you also have to really cut it down to just your best work. You're essentially looking for ways to show them your strengths and also not give them an excuse to say like, this person's not as good or whatever. And then the other thing is, even after you get your first job, the demo reel doesn't really stop there. You don't have to literally create a new demo reel every time you create something new, but you should be thinking about it. And so whatever company you do, whatever project you're on, try to think of it in terms of not just like, okay, I'm working on this project to make this movie or whatever, but also thinking about it in terms of investing in yourself. It's like, okay, what is it that I can do to make something that I can show to other people eventually? And then once you're in, there's a couple things to keep in mind.
What?
Don't be an asshole. You have to work well with others. This is incredibly important in the entertainment industry because it is not that big. I know, several hundred people just through Pixar, but all of us have kind of moved on, or not all of us, but a lot of us have moved on to other companies. And even from Square, like I knew like a couple hundred people from there, and that company no longer exists, but they've gone and moved on to other places. And so as a result, I know maybe a few hundred people in that industry directly, but like every one of them knows like a dozen people or so that I don't know. And so I pretty much know everybody in the entertainment industry 1 or 2 steps removed. And so if you get a reputation of being somebody that's hard to work with or whatever, then people are going to be like, I'm not going to work with that person. Very important.
True in tech and just about anything.
Yeah.
Like,
just don't be a jerk. It is small.
Small.
It's smaller than you would think. Yeah.
It's very small.
The other thing, always keep growing, no matter what you're doing. Like even if that first job seems kind of sucky or whatever, there's always an opportunity there. There's always something that you can do to improve your skills, to learn, and so forth. And then closing with some general advice. These are things that I wish that somebody had told me early on in my career. And the first one is that your taste improves faster than your skill. So there was this great talk by Ira Glass, who is a radio podcast person. And he talks about the gap. And by that he means the gap between your taste, which develops very quickly, and your skill, and you suck at the beginning. And so this can be incredibly discouraging because if you've never done anything before, then and you try it and you're like, okay, that's fine. But then as you get better, you kind of realize like what really good is. You'll start seeing, hopefully as artists, you'll be exposed to things like museums and so forth and other works of art, and you'll get a better sense of like what really great art is. And then you look at your own stuff and you're like, I don't know. It's not that. And so you get more discerning faster than you get skill. And it can be discouraging, but the important thing is that everybody goes through it, and you have to just keep on trying. Which kind of leads to my second point. You are not the horse, and I'll explain. So there is this sort of Zen story that goes around. There's a woman standing on a field. Off in the distance, she sees a man riding a horse, like galloping at a furious pace. And she's like, oh my God, that man must be like going somewhere important. And the galloping horse and the man come closer and closer, and she yells out and says, where are you going? And the guy says, I don't know, ask the horse. And then gallops off. The point is, you are not the horse. This feeling of disappointment, this feeling of not feeling adequate or whatever, even other things like anxiety, depression, these things can be overwhelming at times. But what really helped me, like more recently, is kind of this thing called mindfulness. Has anybody heard of mindfulness? Yeah. So it's a very simple thing. Let's just take a couple minutes to try this out. I want everybody to try closing your eyes. I can see you because my eyes are still open. And now all I want you to do is take a few seconds to breathe in through your nose, and then hold it for a few seconds. And then when you're ready, let it out for a few seconds, a little bit longer. And then just keep on doing this at your own pace. And while you're doing this, I want you to kind of think and feel what it is that your body is doing. Feel the air going through your nose, feel it filling your lungs. How do you feel? And maybe you're feeling happy, maybe you're feeling relaxed, maybe you're feeling anxious, maybe you're feeling tired. All of these things, these are labels that we put on the state of our body, but our body actually has its own internal state. And if you pay attention to that, you focus on that, then you kind of understand that these things that we're labeling, like these feelings, are not actually us. Our body is kind of what is the mechanism for all these things. You can open up your eyes now. The point of this is that if you do this like just a few minutes in the morning or a few minutes in the evening, or more importantly, when you're feeling very stressed or overwhelmed or whatever by some feeling experience, it helps you get a sense of what it is that your body's actually going through. Gives you a little bit of space so that you can actually process it and then maybe put it towards something more effective. And finally, try to set internal goals and not external goals. So I've linked to this YouTube video that I'll pass the link on. And then in here, he's talking about how he became a YouTuber. And he's this pretty reasonably famous YouTuber called Chubby Emu. And he's got like, I don't know, 1 million subscribers or something like that. But when he started off, he was telling his sister, he's like, oh, I want to become a YouTuber. And she was like, okay, how much money are you going to try to make? How many subscribers are you going to try to do? And he's like, I don't know anything about this. I don't know how reasonable it is to do these things. Also, I have no control over these things. And so instead, he set out an internal goal, which was make 1,000 videos. And the reason that you want to do this is that there are things that you can control and there are things that you can't. Like, I could not control whether or not I got hired by Pixar. But the things that I could control is like, okay, try to do whatever I can at whatever company I was, and then try to build up that demo reel, et cetera, et cetera. So try to set internal goals that you can control. Maybe you can't say like, oh, I want to get accepted to this school or something like that. Instead, do things like, I want to make a drawing every night for a month, and then see where that takes me. And setting these internal goals are things that you can have more control over, and as a result will help you build towards a more lasting career. Dreams are good, opportunities are better. And so at the beginning I was talking about my dream was to work at Pixar and and all these other companies, and I totally failed, and it was really kind of disappointing, and it's like, oh, I'm not as good as I thought I was. But I had other opportunities, and since then other opportunities have come up. Like, I didn't even think I would ever work at Google, but then the opportunity came up and I took it, and I'm really, really happy that I did. Same with Apple. You may have a dream to do a very particular thing, and that's great because it helps refine and focus your ideas and your efforts, but you should also keep your mind open towards whatever opportunities come up. Maybe that's a summer job, maybe it's running to somebody that has started a company, maybe it's some career that you've never even thought of. But like, keep an open mind because those are the opportunities that are presented to you. And then finally, do what you can. Like, there are things you can control, things you can. In every situation, there's only so much that you can do. Focus on what you can. And that's pretty much it. I'm gonna I'll start with some pre-submitted questions from students and parents. Thank you for that. What role did your art background have in the overall arc of your career? That's a great question. So as I mentioned before, I didn't actually go to art school, but I've always been interested in art, and that has been a guiding principle in everything that I've done. As a result, I still ended up doing things with computers, but I've always felt a desire to do things that have like some sort of aesthetic interest or some sort of aesthetic component to them. And it's also shaped a lot of the people that I've met and the kinds of things that I enjoy doing. And so even if you don't end up becoming like a professional artist, I think having a background in art is really helpful because it helps motivate like the kind of things that you do. It's also a really fun hobby. So, you know, in some ways you have a little more, well, you definitely have a lot more creative freedom when you do something as a hobby than you do if you have it as a career. And this is another thing, like when you do something for a job, you have a lot of external things that kind of force you to either tailor your skills to a particular market or do a certain thing because it has to fit a particular need. If you're doing it as a hobby, you can do whatever you want. That's kind of neat. What preparations do you need to get a light sketch to the final product? I think the biggest thing is to just do a lot of refinement at the very beginning so that you actually know that you have something worth pushing on to a final sketch. There's this story about a guy who goes to an ad agency and then he goes to this famous artist and it's like, okay, I want you to design a logo for me and then like, you know, my company. And then like 3 weeks later, the guy comes back and it's like this very simple drawing of like 3 lines and it looks kind of like a bird. And the guy's like, well, that was dumb. And like, why am I paying you millions of dollars for 3 lines? And then the guy opens up his closet and there's like thousands of drawings of 3 lines over and over and over again. And so it's like this, the thing is, you have to just do things over and over again and try a bunch of things until you realize you have something that's good, and then you push it on to the final product. What majors in college relate to what you were doing as a career? The career that I'm doing now did not exist when I was in college. It's hard to say what led from A to B. It's more try to find the thing that you really enjoy doing and want to learn more about. There's like 2 schools of thought when it comes to college. One is it like a trade school where you're learning a very specific set of skills like plumbing, electrician, or something like that you will use to then create, like do your job. The other thought is that this is more of an education and it will hopefully help you be a more well-rounded person. And so to that I would say at the early stage, try to get as much of a broad education as possible because you don't know what it is that's going to ignite your interest, your passion, and so forth. And then after that, I don't know, like try to focus on things that will help you actually create things. So in my case, learning how to use computers is incredibly beneficial because everything that I do is kind of built with software kind of in mind. But there's other aspects too, like you could be like making robotics or engineering, or you could be like creating artwork and so forth. Focus on the things that will let you create things on your own. What do animation studios look for when evaluating demo reels? Mostly they're looking for excellence in a very particular field and in a very particular role. So try to focus all of your work on that. And if you have like specific questions on like which field, I can kind of talk a little bit more about that as well. What should one learn for animation early on so that they can pursue it as a career? I think for this one, what you really want to do is develop a sense of what is good animation and what isn't. And if you watch a lot of animation, well, actually, this is true of anything. The more you study something, the better of an expert you are at that thing. If you play a particular video game over and over and over again, then you will understand all the characters, all the special moves, and so forth. And that's true of any field. So what you should do is watch a lot of animation, but also watch it with a critical eye. Maybe watch the same thing multiple times. Try to figure out what it is that's compelling about the things that you like. Oh, what is the funniest thing that happened at Pixar? What is something unexpected that happened? I'm glad this was submitted earlier because it took me a long time to kind of think about a good anecdote, and then I finally came up with one. So you guys are familiar with like April Fool's jokes? So one year, I thought it would be kind of funny to create like a fake version of a website that made it look like the script for our movie had leaked. And this was actually on The Incredibles. So the first movie I worked on at Pixar. So I typed up this fake script about The Incredibles, and then I made this fake website that looked very much like the original one. And I sent it as an email like, oh no, our script had leaked. And I thought that was really funny. And it would have been funny, except that it just so happened that on that day, the internet went out. And so they got the email, but they couldn't click on the link to see that my funny joke, which I was like, oh, I worked really hard on. And so as a result, all the executives, all the people at the top were like panicking that this had leaked and all this stuff, and they were trying to figure out what to do. Finally, like hours and hours later, when the internet came back on, they realized it's a joke. And they're like, ha ha, very funny, Mom. Funny, funny to me, not so funny to them. And then a couple weeks later, we had a crew meeting, and it turned out that the director and the producer were going to go off-site for like a week or a few days to kind of really figure out what the movie was going to be and stuff like that. So they were going to do a big trip on there. And they announced to the teams, like, okay, we're going to be off for this retreat for the next few days, but while we're gone, Mock is in charge. Try to get the movie done before we're back. Good luck. And I was like, ha ha ha. And then I said, okay, I've got 2 words for you guys, sock puppets. And everybody laughed. It was really funny. But then, like in the next day, a couple of my friends were like, yeah, we should do that. We should make a sock puppet version of The Incredibles. And I was like, no, that was the joke. That is, you don't have to actually do it. And they're like, no, this will be amazing. And so enough people got together and then decided that they wanted to do it. And so like over a couple of weekends, I actually wrote another like a sock puppet version of every single shot in there, and then made this thing with them. And so there is a sock puppet version of The Incredibles, and that's one of the Easter eggs that's on that first DVD. So if you search the internet, it's there. Ha ha ha. And I think that was the last one. Yeah, that was the last question. And so you asked me how many designers did I work with. So this is a little bit different. In entertainment, there aren't really designers. So designers is more of a term that's within tech. So now I'm into tech, and we've got basically designers and software engineers. And then there's also what are known as UX engineers who design the user experience for them. And in entertainment, it's generally artists broken down into the different roles. And so I was an effects artist. And there are roughly like, say 300 people-ish working on a particular movie at any given time. There's usually 12 to 24 people in each of the different groups, like animation, storyboard, effects, lighting, and so forth. Hopefully that answers your questions. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
So, for what you worked on, you require knowledge of computers, right?
Yes.
So, how many years of knowledge of computers do you need to do that?
Oh, that's great. So one of the things is it's not really computers, it's like a particular skill set. And as an example, let's say you wanted to do modeling. Have you ever done any modeling on in the computer software or anything like that? A little? So if you wanted to become a modeler, so let's say you wanted to model objects or something like that, then you basically just need to learn that computer program. And there's many to choose from. Like the one that I was most familiar with was called Maya. And so as a result, it's not like you have to go to school specifically for that. You just have to get a copy of that program and then learn how to do the things. And fortunately, we're now in a state where a lot of these things have YouTube videos, and so you could look up whatever you're interested in, find YouTube videos for them. And fortunately also, there's often free versions of every software. They're usually watermarked and for student use only or something like that. But basically you can get a hold of many different kinds of software and learn a particular thing. I would say it's more like, what is it that you want to do? And then show proficiency and feel comfortable with that. I mean, it's kind of like learning to play the piano. It's like, well, you got to get a piano, and then you got to practice it, and then you feel comfortable with it, and then once you've gotten a level of proficiency from there, then you can put together things like a demo reel. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so how is your current work at Google related to art?
Now I work at Apple, and but I used to work at Google, And I can't talk about Apple, so it's good that you asked about Google. So when I was at Google, my first job was working on a project that was it basically did 3D versions of everything. That was the goal. And so they would take just random objects, put them in a scanner. It was basically like a refrigerator-sized thing. You put it in there, and it spins around, and there's like a bunch of cameras on there. It takes hundreds and hundreds of pictures, and in the end, it would create a CG model. And so my background was in computer graphics, and when you have a background in computer graphics, then you really understand things like cameras and the way models are put together and how they can be modified and so forth and manipulated. And so I was really happy to get onto that project because it was a way to use a little bit of my computer graphics background. But the second project, the one that I spent the most time on, was Tilt Brush. And so that one was directly an art project. And the reason I went to that was because I had such a strong interest in art. But there I also learned more about user interfaces. And so this is something that like I wasn't really exposed to and I didn't really think about that much in the past. But essentially, it's the way that the software like is how you interact with software. And so for doing things like that, you kind of need to have a little bit of an art background, like an aesthetic sense of things, but also a good sense of like what people use and how they use them. And so I found that very rewarding. Yeah.
Would you say that your background in art helped you with your animation? Like, oh, here the lighting is a bit off. Or...
Yeah. This is also one of the great things about working at a place like Pixar. You just get exposed to people who are incredibly good at what they do. And then you also learn the nuances about things. Like if you've never eaten a hamburger before and you just ate one hamburger, you'd be like, oh, okay, wow, that was amazing. It's like, this is a hamburger. But if you eat 1,000 hamburgers from 1,000 different suppliers, and then somebody who's an expert at these things also tells you, okay, this is what makes this one good, notice the flavor in this one, notice the notes of umami in this, and so forth, then you develop like a sense of taste. Similarly, like getting exposed to that level of skill and art and so forth made me better at things like drawing, for example. Like I took a few like informal classes at Pixar. They did like figure drawing classes, and one of the reasons that they do that is they felt like no matter what role you're doing at Pixar, having a good eye helps. And I found that to be very true. Just being exposed to that level of skill and then learning more about that did help in everything that I did afterwards. I could say like, oh, okay, I can tell this looks better or this doesn't. And I could also be a little bit more intelligent about saying like why it is that this is important. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna ask about like the specifics for demo reels. Like,
Yeah.
if you were specializing in VFX, like what are they looking for versus like a 2D animation reel?
Okay, yeah, it depends. It differs from thing to thing. So since you asked about effects and animation, in effects what they're looking for is the complexity of the effect that you can do. So if you have a really impressive water simulation, that's going to be a much more impressive thing than if you just do something like, I don't know, something exploding. And if you've done effects for long enough, you get a sense of what's easy and what's hard. One of the reasons that water is so hard is because we're so familiar with it. Everybody has drunk a glass of water, everybody's seen a river, everybody knows what rain kind of looks like. And so because we're so familiar with it, those things are difficult. And so if you can pull off something that everybody is familiar with in a convincing way, that's pretty impressive, especially if it's on a larger scale and much more complex. Animation is even more complex because we see movement every single day. Like you could imagine if somebody said, okay, draw me, I don't know, draw me a Joshua tree, and then you told somebody else, draw me George Washington. People are going to be way more critical about George Washington drawings than they are about a Joshua tree because not that many people are as familiar with a Joshua tree. There's this famous thing of like, try to draw a bicycle. And you get like 100 people and you'd be surprised at like how bad these drawings are because nobody really knows. Like, well, we know that there's a chain somewhere and there's a pedal, but where does it connect? And like, are there 3 lines here for the frame or is it like one big line? You know, you don't know. And so when you're drawing that, you know, you could pretty much draw anything as long as it's got a couple wheels. You'd be like, okay, that's a bike. Whereas if you draw a face, that's like one of the hardest things to draw because everybody is intimately familiar with the face. Are you guys like seeing any of the generative AI art kind of stuff? And like, usually it's pretty good, but like sometimes it's just awful. Like especially hands, like those hands where they're just like 6 fingers or just like in weird positions. It's because we're incredibly familiar with them. For animation, what they're looking for is believability, and in particular, they're looking for story. And this is kind of what Pixar looks at. So when they look at an animation, they're looking for something that conveys a sense of emotion, something that moves people. This is also very true with acting. If you are interested in acting, then one of the things that you do is you record a soliloquy or some sort of monologue. And if you just go to YouTube and you just do a search for actors doing monologues, you'll kind of see a sense of that. And animation is very similar. What you try to do is create some compelling scene, some compelling shot, and some way of making the audience feel something. If you can do that, you've got it made. Great question.
Last one. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, you've never asked a question, so yeah.
So I was wondering, which programming language, like, is generally, in your opinion, like, which one is the most versatile?
Ooh, Willow, yeah, that's a big question. What is it? Yeah.
Start a gang war with that.
Yeah.
Gotta be careful with that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ones that I would recommend people kind of start with, and one is Java, one is Python. One of the things that I like to think of is don't focus so much on the programming language, because they're all kind of similar unless you go to some sort of weird thing like Lisp or Scheme or something. Yeah. But essentially they're all like ways to tell the computer what you want it to do. And so for that, you just need to really be methodical about how you think about things. And so in a sense, the programming language doesn't really matter as much, but I would start with Python because Python has a lot of things kind of built into it, and also approach it more from the perspective of like, what is the problem that I want to solve? And then, yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, it's good. Python's a pretty good start, easy to get into and to stay out of trouble.
Yeah.
If you really want to go hardcore, C++C.
I would not recommend that, but
Well,
but that's just what I used. Yeah, that's
no, but it,
yeah.
it teaches you about like memory and all that.
Yeah. But Python's great.
You kind of want to understand those concepts. So.
This is a little bit of a tip. If you ever want to do any sort of project with a bunch of people, you will find that the hardest thing to find are programmers. So that also means if you want to do something on your own, it's very hard to do things unless you have somebody who can do those sorts of things. There are things that I have been interested in because they are things that I can do on my own. And one is actually writing, because I can write. Maybe not well, but like at least I am physically capable of writing and I have a computer and all that. And the other is comics. And the reason they're comics is because you just do the art yourself and you don't need to rely on anybody else. But like if you want to make a video game, for example, you need to have software people, and that's much harder to find than art people at this stage. Yeah, but thank you all. I'll be around for a little while, and if you want to come up and ask other questions and stuff.